recording and all that stuff. So hi again, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We're glad to have you here with Jeff VanderMeer and Catherynne Valenti. We are recording this event and it will be available on the Books in Common NW website after this and also on YouTube. So if you missed part of it or you want to tell your friends about it later, please do join us later on. We here, I should say we, I am James Crossley. I'm the general manager of Madison Books in Seattle. And in partnership with our friends at Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, we are bringing you the Books in Common series of author events. We're very excited to be here with these two authors and want to encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there. We will be monitoring that throughout and throwing your questions to our authors. And there's also a chat feature there as well. You should pay attention to the chat function, not just if you want to make comments of your own, but also to note the links that we'll be throwing in there every once in a while to the sponsoring bookstores. Please do click on those and please do buy all the books that you can because they're very good. You're buying those will support these authors and the bookstores who bring them to you. We should also mention that this is a space we want to remain safe for everyone, so we will be monitoring the chat and the questions, and any disrespectful comments will be removed, as will the people who made those comments from the space. I will tell you a little bit about the authors who are here with us tonight. You probably already know something about them, but just to make it official sounding, we have with us Catherynne Valenti, who is the New York Times bestselling author of 40 works of speculative fiction and poetry, including space opera, the Refrigerator Monologues, Palimpsest, the Orphan's Tales series, Deathless, Radiance, the Glass Town game, and the best titled children's book series ever printed, which begins with the Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a ship of her own making. She is the winner of the Andre Norton, Tiptree, Sturgeon, Prix Imaginales, Eugie Foster Memorial, Mythopoeic, Rhysling, Lambda, Locus, Romantic Times Critic Choice, and Hugo Awards. She has been a finalist for the Nebula and World Fantasy Awards, and she lives on an island off the coast of Maine with a small but growing menagerie of beasts, some of which are human. Jeff VanderMeer is the New York Times bestselling author of the Southern Reach trilogy, which has been translated into over 35 languages. The first novel in that series, Annihilation, won the Nebula and Shirley Jackson Award and was made into a movie by Paramount in 2018. Recent works include Dead Astronauts, Born, a finalist for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, and The Strange Bird. These novels are all set in the Born universe and are being developed for TV by AMC. He is also a prolific editor and has recently published with his wife Anne, The Big Book of Modern Fantasy, called The Weird Thoreau by The New Yorker. He frequently speaks about issues related to climate change and storytelling. He lives in Tallahassee, Florida, with his aforementioned wife Anne, cat Neo, a yard full of native plants, and a treasonous rabbit with an avid Twitter following. I'd like to thank you both for joining us on kind of a personal level because I'm a great fan of both your works, a great connection to them. I have read your works for years and now I'm getting to read them to my children, which is a great special pleasure. And I will mention also you're among the most prolific authors we've hosted in this. The page where you go to buy those books just scrolls on and on and on. I can't believe that both of you at your unadvanced ages have produced so much already. And I want to mention also that I think you're both kind of unmatched for sheer creativity and imagination in your work, which is really the highest praise that I can give, I think, when I'm describing what I look for in a book. So, so from here in Seattle and Maine and Florida, I will duck away and I will look for someone from Baja California maybe to fill out the four corners or something. But I will disappear for now and I'll let you guys take it away and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're also Team VA. We are usually next to each other in the bookstore.
Right. That's true.
So it's awesome to bring the team together. Jeff Van's appearing in this Zoom call. But Jeff and I have actually known each other for 16 years, for those of you who are unaware of that. So it's really cool to get to do a thing together and celebrate this awesome book that has come out of your head.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm glad you're, like you were saying earlier on Twitter, this is the first public event that we have done, and we've known each other a long time. And I have to say also that I feel like I've known you longer. You've written so much at such a high quality for so long in that period when your first book came out that I actually feel like I was looking back, I was thinking, surely she was there in the 90s and before, but so yeah.
Well, time has no meaning anymore, as we all know.
Right, that's true.
I mean, we like in so many ways we are living in the kind of new weird slipstream, timeless, asensical and chaotic world that we were writing about in the early 2000s, and some of us still are.
Yeah, that's true, actually. I was glad that I knew what day it was, but I am a little concerned about how many inanimate objects in the yard I'm talking to on a regular basis. So
100%, absolutely. We've already got lots of questions coming in, but I'm going to get in there first and ask my first question, because the minute I cracked the cover of this book, really on page 1, I twigged to the connection between Jonathan Lamb's Head and, of course, the Thackeray T. Lamb's Head Cabinet of Curiosities, which was one of the first things that I read by you way back in the day. And I want to know what the story is of taking that work and turning it into a YA novel, and where that came from, and what those choices were inspired by.
Yeah, no. So there were 2 anthologies: a fake disease guide called the I can't remember half of these things anymore. The Thackeray T. Lamb's Head Pocket Guide to Eccentric and Imaginary Diseases, which you can still find in medical libraries, sometimes under humor, sometimes under actual medical guides, and then the Cabinet of Curiosities, which was a follow-up. And for both of these, I had to develop kind of the backstory of this kind of progressive doctor who, he made a real, in his mind, disease guide, and then also had all these adventures. And there were a lot of collaborators for those books, but I wrote the backstory and all that. And there were a lot of mysterious things in his life, like his wife dying in a car crash unexpectedly, and some other things where you weren't quite sure if what was being told to you on the surface was actually what had happened. And so I think that's what kind of lodged in my head and made me think, there was something more to the story. And then one day I just had this image of Jonathan Lamb's Head, the grandson, inheriting the mansion of his grandfather, full of all these curios, and being told, there's our cat in the backdrop, being told that to collect his inheritance, he has to catalog all the contents. And then I'd always wanted to write about really wild magic, and so I came up with this alt-earth called Aurora, where the magic really is pretty wild and unfettered, and unusual things happen when you use it, and there's a lot of complicated political things going on. And then so Jonathan kind of stumbles onto that world through a door in the mansion. And so it's a fairly, I think you'd say a kind of traditional setup.
Portal
that is kind of a portal to an absurdist misadventure, which is the fun I had in writing it. So you have Napoleon's head on a pedestal as the military advisor to Aleister Crowley. You have an amphibious Kafka and some other things that come up, and a lot of talking animals, which was important to me to kind of do a revisionist take on talking animals.
Sure. Well, so what did you want to revise?
Well, just like, I mean, and it's not that other people haven't done it, but I think that one thing that struck me about the Narnia books, and there were a lot of things later growing up that when I read them as an adult, that struck me about the Narnia books. But especially the first time I read them, I really was not sure why the talking animals didn't just form their own government rather than accept monarchy after overthrowing a fascist government. So that's one thing I wanted. I wanted the talking animals to not be sidekicks, but to actually have their own agenda. And that actually, I think, further kind of strengthened and deepened the plot, which will become even more apparent in volume 2. And then also I had some animals in the yard that I wanted to transfer their personalities, because I've gotten to know some of the individual raccoons and stuff into characters who are animals in the book. So.
And what made you want to do a YA novel and do this particular idea as YA?
It's a very good question. I just was taken with the idea of this shy nature boy who's both from Great Britain and from Florida, and has kind of mixed up syntax even because of that, because that's kind of how I grew up, because I grew up in Fiji, which was a British Commonwealth country, and then came back to the US. And in addition to being tormented for a British accent for the couple of years it took to lose it, I also was tormented by my English teachers because I kept failing spelling tests and things like that. And they were not at all sympathetic. But I found something interesting in that confluence, and I found something interesting in the confluence of a large cast of characters, and Jonathan almost at times being lost in this because he doesn't have enough agency as the novel opens to really control the situation. And so I thought it would be really interesting to have a situation like that at the beginning. He's thrown into this, and then in the second volume, where he goes back to the academy that he studies at, to show him in a different context, and show all the characters in a different context, where they have a different kind of authority, a different kind of way of interacting with other people. And that applies even to his friends like Rack, who I think will come across differently maybe in the second volume. So
we have an awesome question here, so I'm just going to interject it. It says dumb question, but it is not dumb. And I had never thought of this. Has anyone ever pointed out to you that you've both written books about human women becoming cosmic space whales? And it had not occurred to me that we have both done that. That's Radiance for me.
And that's, I guess, acceptance for me, although it's not overtly. It's kind of like in the detail you kind of get.
Mine is pretty literally a whale.
Right.
It's a space whale. It's not like cetacean phylum, but it's pretty whaley.
Yeah, but it's true that all the fan art from acceptance with regard to that transformation is all space whales.
Yeah.
So that's definitely true.
So that did not occur to me, but well spotted. I keep hoping this will become a new trend. It says we would call it space whale punk. And both of those books made me cry. Never stop writing. I don't think anybody has to worry about you and I not writing.
No, but another thing I think is similar, if I may, is that we both write in different modes a lot and kind of switch course a lot. And it's always interesting. And I think it takes a little bit of patience. I don't know how it is for you. For me, I find that I lose readers and gain readers regularly through the different, and then you just kind of go with that, and early on, I guess it concerned me. And then after a while, it actually was a way of becoming more mature as a writer in terms of thinking of the audience and thinking about how you never are writing for everybody. You just can't. So
no, I mean, every book I write, there's people who ask if it's my first book. It's like, no, I just haven't written comedy before. I haven't written middle grade before. So like you are seeing me for the first time, but in fact, this is my 14th novel or whatever. And I mean, I used to get kind of antsy about that and irritated because like, no, it wasn't my first book, but it just means that, there's a whole new group of people who don't read the other kinds of books that I write.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't trouble me as much anymore. So I'm gonna combine one of the questions the question that came up first, which is answered but didn't get answered, and I'm going to combine it with my next question, because the fan question was whose critters would win in a fight, and it's Jeff's critters, no question to me.
I don't know about that. I don't know. It's first of all, I have to catalog
so much
all
meaner
the
than
critters
mine.
in all of your books. That would take quite a while. So
much meaner than mine. They're angrier. They're meaner.
Does it include fungus or not include fungus?
I mean, I think fungus counts.
Okay.
And I've got a bunch of mushrooms.
I might be able to hold my own a little bit. I don't know.
I've got a bunch of mushrooms in my next middle grade book, and your mushrooms would still destroy mine. But bringing that into my next question, which was, why marmots, Jeff? Why mushrooms? Why meerkats? What have plants and rodent pests ever done to you?
Well, the meerkat one's hilarious because I don't know if I was just sheltered from National Geographic specials or what, but when I wrote Venice Underground, which has very aggressive meerkats in it, I thought meerkats were 4 or 5 feet tall because I had just seen a photo with no context. So when I wrote about them, I had to then somehow explain why they were 4 or 5 feet tall and not naturally that way. And I don't know. I mean, there's creatures that to me, there's something about the way they're curious about the world, or something about their physique that I like, or something that makes them seem really like alien life forms on our planet. I think squid and fungus fall into that category, and I gravitated to them because I felt like that already was a fantasy element just in their life cycles. Marmots, though, in the new book is kind of hilarious. And this will sound like a very commercial thing, but it's just that the way my mind works, I like sometimes having a constraint. And I spent an awful lot of time on a couple of movie options, and so did my agent, differentiating different bears in different properties, and very carefully defining them to the point where my agent said, you can't write about bears anymore if you want to option anything, because we have already sliced that pie very thin. And so I think that probably if it wasn't for that the giant marmots would have just been regular sized bears. But then the opportunity came for there to be something giant that's usually small, which I tend to respond to very well. And then it actually became a plot point. So, and I'd always wanted to write about marmots ever since a semester in upstate New York, where they were all over the place. So I don't know. There's just certain creatures that something about their life cycle or their appearance, and sometimes it's just they're really cute. until I write about them, and then somehow they're horrifying. I don't know.
Well, didn't you tell me ages ago that your dad was an entomologist?
Yes, he is an entomologist. Yeah, so I've never written about ants really. Maybe because that's his expertise. I don't know.
But it seems to me that there's probably a connection there, because your plant life is very insectoid, and you know, the kind of psychology lends itself to thinking of hive minds and things like that, and,
Yeah, well,
and invasion and.
Well, I mean, I don't have any like, I like insects. I like a lot of insects that a lot of people find gross or frightening, to the point where half of my Facebook life now is, don't kill that spider. Could you please let it go outside? And I don't know why this stresses me out. Well, it stresses me out more this year. So I think that basically, if you looked at my Facebook activity, about half of it would be pleading with people not to kill insects that are actually just fine, but that people are scared of. So
Yeah.
so probably that's my dad's influence. But.
Yeah. I saw on your Twitter today the phrase contamination fiction, which I had not heard before, but seemed to so wonderfully capture a certain subsection of your books, because not all of your books are like this, but right. You know, a certain subsection of them, the Southern Reach trilogy and City of Saints, and a lot of them kind of have that feeling. Like Farah Mendelssohn wrote a book called Rhetorics of Fantasy, and she talks about intrusive fantasy. So it's kind of the opposite of a portal fantasy. So instead of you know, somebody from our world going into the speculative element of the story, the speculative element is intruding onto our world, which seems to be a big part of what gets you going. So I wanted to talk about that phrase. Like, is that did you make that up, or is it something that you just feel describes your work?
It's really interesting how exterior things become internalized. So I think at first, like in the Ambergris books, it's just literally like I would walk outside my house, and without realizing it, there was just so much contamination, decay going on that it was just going to get into the books. So I didn't really think about it as an actual like theme or something. And then with the writings about those books, that term came up. And so then you begin to think consciously about it as a novelist, but then you internalize that and it comes out through your subconscious. So So it is a term that at first I wasn't aware of, and then was aware of, and then start thinking about, well, if I'm consciously aware of this, how can I start thinking in a more rational way, and then prime my subconscious to have it come out differently. And then the Southern Reach came out, which was a very different way of looking at contamination. I find the subject interesting because there's so much of our world that's actually, we have this idea of inside and outside. And that includes just our bodies, but also being inside, being outside, when in fact, so much of the world is permeable and so much about our bodies are permeable. And it feels to me that, like climate change and some of these other topics, that if we were more aware of that, and I think we've become very aware of that this year,
Yeah.
If we could render the invisible more visible and kind of see that instead of it just being an abstract, that we would interact with our world in more benevolent and fruitful ways. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and it just keeps coming into the fiction in various modes. Sometimes it's the major thing, sometimes it's just a small thing humming around about in the background. So
there's a question from a viewer that goes, I would be interested to hear about how your immediate environment, Maine and Florida, has influenced your writing, as you both live in distinctive places. And I think that feeds into what you're talking about, because of course, humid environments, the difference between inside and outside becomes much more permeable.
Yeah, no, definitely. And even Fiji, although it had more of a temperate climate, believe it or not, in places, you could even go up into the mountains because it was a volcanic island and have a little bit of a winter. It's still, there was still not that real separation. And then Florida, of course, in some ways intensified that. I mean, we live in a part of Florida, the Panhandle, that's one of the most biodiverse places in the world. A lot of people don't realize that. So in some parts of the Panhandle, it's as biodiverse as like the Amazon rainforest. And so you really feel it. You feel I mean, since we bought this, so we took over this house. But when we bought this house, and we discontinued using pesticides and herbicides, I mean, I'll put the trail cam out at night and it's triggered because there's just clouds of moths. I mean, absolutely gorgeous on this black and white trail cam, but the point is that there's just so much life that it's hard to keep that separation and feel like you're not part of it, especially when I'm out there working a lot. And I think that more and more it's coming out in the fiction in interesting ways. And I don't know how it is in Maine. I mean, you're on an island, and I get the sense that you're out in nature a lot. And a lot of what you talk about, I'm actually kind of envious of, because it seems like such a different environment.
It's very different. And you know, that difference between inside and outside, everything in New England is about maintaining those boundaries as hard as you can. We have, before I moved to New England, I didn't even know what the word mudroom meant. It is an antechamber, almost an airlock between the outside and the inside, so that nothing from outside can get inside. And of course, this is important because the winters are so difficult here. But you know, mildew is not a problem, though we do have humid summers. And everything about a New England house is particularly to handle moisture and keep it out of the house. But on top of that, I do live on this island. I live on an island that has no bridge, so the only access is by boat. And I think if you'll find this interesting, Jeff,
really cool.
It is cool, but it means that the only animals on this island are animals that were either brought here or could walk across during the 19th century, when for a brief period the bay would freeze solid in the winter.
That's
fascinating. So we have deer.
Yeah.
We have no squirrels. There are no squirrels on this island. My son just saw his first squirrel, and he's almost 2, because we don't have them. And everyone is very careful to make sure we don't have rabbits, squirrels, the kinds of, because it's a small island. We do, however, have beavers. How did beaver get here? Who brought a beaver? But you know, people might have brought them because we had a menagerie in the early part of the 20th century here. This used to be kind of a circus island. So like there were crocodiles. There's not real crocodiles. But I find one of the things I find most fascinating, and it's very VanderMeerian to me, is that though we have no squirrels on this island, something that would be common in any other place in this country, we have minks. I don't know who brought a mink. I don't think they came across the bay, but we have minks, and everyone who keeps chickens here is well aware that we have minks.
Okay, yeah.
We lose chickens to minks quite frequently. But there is a population, stable breeding population of minks on this island, turkeys too. So we have a very strange, eclectic, specific group of animals here, and everything else everyone tries very hard to keep out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's fascinating, though. That I mean, now I really want to see
Well,
this.
I said it's very
logical
VanderMeerian in a
studies
way
of it.
that, yeah, like it's Mink Island. God knows why.
Yeah, and of course it's totally different here. I mean, when we were in upstate New York for a semester, I couldn't believe that you could put butter or bread out for more than 10 minutes without the molding process starting and things melting. So, it's like,
Yeah, boy, and I never leave butter out here, but that's that's left over from living in California when I was younger, and you would never do that.
we'd
Like
never, yeah.
people who grew up here have no issue leaving butter out. Like they would never think twice about it. And it's stuff like that that really, for people like you and me who live quite far from where we grew up, like it's those things that sort of connect worlds in your head, like the absolute assumptions of the place that you came to, which are not even considerations in the place that you live now.
That's cool. Yeah, the rituals you bring with you too, even though you don't need them anymore.
Yeah, no, it's a very it's a strange country with a lot of different things. I didn't know about the biodiversity in Florida. That's really cool. Yeah. Okay. We'll hold off on a couple of these other questions because they're mostly getting away from kind of the thrust that I want to talk about. I want to get back to A Peculiar Peril specifically a little bit, because I want to talk about the thing that made me smile the most, which is how many kind of literary bells and whistles this has. Like even the table of contents is almost a short story in and of itself. Like what you've done here is you're trying to give fancy postmodernism and make it fun for teens. And I love that. I think that that's amazing. So I just want to talk about like what your process and what your interest in all of these toys, this toy box that you've put together.
Well, it was it's oddly like the Ambergris series, which has a lot of literary allusions, and the parts of a book actually do kind of like storytelling work, like the font notes are actual stories. And so I was thinking in that mode. So it's something I've done before, but not in this particular way. I mean, one thing that's inverted from my other fantasy work is that the humor is much more overt here, and a certain kind of hopefully playfulness and fun, whereas usually it's used for something a little more dire. And so I just thought maybe the table of contents is actually kind of alive and almost self-aware. And then I was aware that what I was writing was something that, hopefully someone will sit down with in a comfortable chair and read a couple chapters of every night. That it's very rich, and I know that it's very rich. And you and I have both had those situations where people talk about the prose. You know what I'm saying? And
that's why I started smiling before you finished your sentence. I knew what you were going to say.
And so I had to be aware of that, and how much of that I did, so that it wouldn't float away into whimsy. But I did want to do that, and I also felt it was the kind of book that could have Easter eggs in it. So there is a scene where a character, without giving you too much context, expels the contents of their pouch, and everything that's expelled is actually items from other of my novels. And I figured I could get away with it there, right? So. And then the chapter, as you were talking about with the table of contents, the table of contents actually gets drunk at one point, which is it's a fairly risky thing to do. And again, it's like, well, hopefully people will follow this and find it fun. But I think part of it is that if you have fun while you're writing it, and then while you're editing it, you have the restraint to cut things if you have to, that hopefully people will enjoy it as well. And so far I'm getting a lot of really good feedback.
Yeah, someone in the chat here says that they love the mid-book survey. Hopefully you got that.
Well,
I did too. Like that was great. Those annoying surveys that are in the back of especially books for younger readers all the time, like to make that part of the story is really cool.
Yes, that was very fun. I used to do test questions for various college tests and things. So
I remember that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I really I was like I mean, it's gonna sound like it's damning with faint praise, and it isn't. I was like, that's bold, man. Like I respect it 100%. I think that you know, for those of us like you and I who move over into YA in middle grade from adult, rather than like being people who that's all we ever wanted to write, which is not a bad thing. Only wanting to write YA is fine. Like I think we are often trying to push that envelope of how much we can get away with bringing that toy box into you know, the very, very hyper commercial book of YA, world of YA publishing.
Yeah, I mean, again, I also was trying to follow the characters, and some of them are just so absurdist that element from the table of contents kind of follows it in, and so I just had to trust that.
Mm.
And my hope was that the more whimsical things and the things that might be a little bit over the top were still allied to something. And then I think, helped by the fact that, you know, I've always written about really bombastic men. Like Lowry in the Southern Reach trilogy is really over the top, but he actually is a lot like someone I knew when I had a day job. Like you wouldn't have believed it if you hadn't seen it. But I think we have seen it the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh yeah.
That you can be a buffoon and still be in power and dangerous, and you know, all those kinds of things. So there were things that were over top about like Crowley that I didn't really worry about too much, if that makes any sense. And then the fact that I was dealing with an alt Earth, that gave me some leeway because I was doing a historical mashup where different time periods kind of collide, either because, like in Napoleon's Head's case, he's been on cold storage for a while, so it still makes sense that he's in this era that's a little bit after his death and things like that. So so I just kind of went with it. I was like, I'm just going to do it, and we'll see what happens and see who wants to publish it, if anyone.
Yeah, it's very cool, and I did like the humor. There's I think one of my favorite lines in it was y'all, in meaning the word y'all is an abomination upon the face of the deep, which is just a great line that I will probably be using in my regular conversation, only I may insert some Maine slang into where y'all is. So yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I want to talk about Crowley himself in a minute, because I did this I dealt with some of these issues with Glasstown Game, which is, it deals with the Bronte children, and they go to this kind of surreal version of early 19th century England. And so one of the things that I had to deal with, and I'm sure that it was in your mind as well, is like how much to expect an audience to know about the thing you're making an alt of. And you know, Napoleon is a name that everyone knows, but beyond Napoleon, it's a balance line to walk. So
I think
in your research and how much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So actually, there's a character becomes more major in volume 2, who's in volume 1, Alfred Cuban, who is a decade era writer that nobody knows, and I felt that was actually a plus. It's like nobody knows him, so it doesn't matter. I mean, because the context doesn't matter from the real world anyway for where he's in it. So some of the historical characters, it was like literally they're so obscure. That's fine. They're just, as far as most readers are concerned, they're just a character in the book. And then people like Crowley, I did read quite a bit to get a feel of what I thought his psyche might be in an alt world as an alt Crowley. And I did go with some of the more, like, I guess you would call them sinister things, like the fact that he experimented on cats and other things he did like that, you know, a lot of people like forgive him for in wanting to be part of his cult. And just also then, you know, I figured Crowley enthusiasts will understand that this is not the Crowley from our Earth, so maybe I have some leeway there. But then to get things in there, like there's something about his relationship with his father and where he went to school and how that influenced him that's actually from real life. And so the balance was just simply, I don't want him to come across as a realistic historical character. And he's in fact involved in so much decision making and so much crisis management that there's really not a lot of time in the narrative to devote to like sharing facts about him. Though it is funny because the Bushwick Book Club did a series of musical numbers based on Peculiar Peril, and there was one that I admired a lot because it was from a guy who was very much influenced by Crowley, who handed me my ass in the song for making Crowley the villain, and I actually thought I liked that a lot. I thought that was wonderful.
Well, what made you want to take Aleister Crowley and make him the villain? I hate Aleister Crowley, the actual person. So like I can sympathize with wanting to explore how
Now,
awful he really was.
it's one of those things that just came about, and I think it's because I think actually for the Lamb's Head books, there's a reference to Crowley, and there was that ridiculous image of him in the like mage's cap and kind of hunched over.
Yeah.
And I think that's why. I think he's actually a reference. It's just there's so many references in the Lamb's Head books, the anthologies, that I sometimes forget where something comes from. But I think that image, which is also in Wonder Book too, I think, combined with some of the stuff I knew about him, made him seem flamboyant and larger than life. And I wanted somebody larger than life, but also somebody who was grounded by a few facts that you would know. I didn't want him to just be somebody that was a character in the book that was not a historical figure. I don't know why, but it felt necessary for that to be that way.
Interesting. So someone says, I have a sort of strange question for Jeff. I noticed that you include multiple detailed descriptions of a creature's maw in some of your work. I noticed it came up multiple times in Born, has come again in A Peculiar Peril. Am I making up a pattern where there isn't one, or are maws a particular interest of yours?
Well, I'm making a note to get rid of this stylistic tick. I didn't know that I had. There'll be no more descriptions of maws in any of my books going forward.
Thanks a lot, anonymous attendee.
I think it's, I mean, like I think you're talking about Ruthless, this monster in Peculiar Peril. And I think that I do have a fascination with squid-like and other invertebrates and whatnot, and maybe their maws, just how weird they are. I don't know. Maybe like I just said, I just won't do that again.
I don't think it was meant to be that. I just think that they thought they saw a motif.
Does anyone else want to tell me something I'm doing too much of so I can get rid of it?
I don't think it's meant to be critical. I think
no. I know they didn't. Yeah.
All right. So somebody just asked a question in the chat that is also in the Q&A thing. So the people want to know that for both of us, can we talk? The first one is, can we talk more about our takes on transferring traditionally adult postmodernist techniques to YA middle grade? And the other is about shifting between target age groups, middle grade to YA, etc. So.
Well, I think that with regard to the postmodern stuff, it's just simply more of just applying what I'd already done with regard to fantasy, and sometimes exaggeration, especially with something like Aurora, is actually a way of maintaining the reality of the place that's imaginary. Mm-hmm. So to my mind, a lot of the exaggeration through the postmodern technique and whatnot, although I'm not even sure I would call it that, because a lot of that stuff is actually kind of like modernist technique, but when you apply it to fantasy rather than realistic fiction, it looks postmodern. I don't know. It's a little late for me to examine that too much, but it feels to me like it's actually hearkening back to really old-fashioned stuff to some degree, and 19th century novels and whatnot. But I don't think that it so much makes a difference with regard to whether it's YA or not YA, but as to whether it's fantasy or realism, as to what it is actually doing. And in all cases, in Peculiar Peril, it's still, as far as I'm concerned, cementing the reality of this wildly magical place. And it's not really meant to break the fourth wall. There is one place that the fourth wall is broken in Peculiar Peril. And I'm still waiting for some reader to tell me that they saw it, because it's just in passing, and I think it's very funny because it refers back to the table of contents, but I haven't heard back yet on that. As for the audience thing, again, I feel like it's a matter for me of following the character and knowing that even though Jonathan is not a chosen one, is not the only point of view, that he is in a way the compass of the novel. I wanted to do a character who, in a way, despite being shy and maybe seeming younger than his age, is not actually going to change, in the sense that he does very much know who he is already. and he knows who he is already because he's kind of grown up on his own or with just his mother to help him until her disappearance and all the stuff that she's dealing with. And so in a weird way, he is the anchor of the novel because of that. And that's what I was interested in pursuing and writing about. And I didn't really think about anything other than that. I did think about all of the fiction that I read as a kid and as a teen and what I got out of that, and which books as an adult I still liked, and which ones for whatever reason, including like the Narnia books, I wasn't as fond of as an adult. And so those are the things that are on my mind. And then it's the case where you give it to your agent and they're the ones who sell it.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. They're in many ways not postmodern techniques. For one thing, because we're past postmodernism,
Right.
which is not a thing that comes up very often. It's just people screwed themselves by calling it postmodernism, and now no one knows what to call it. But also, many of these techniques are very, very old. One of the things people kept calling out as being so innovative about Fairyland was the little chapter descriptions, like chapter 1 in which such and such and such and such. That is not new, and I didn't make it up. It like goes back to Mort Arthur. Those are absolutely not in any way postmodern, but they came across as such because it hasn't been used lately. And you know, I break the fourth wall all day long. I love breaking the fourth wall. It's like my favorite. You can just tell people exactly what you want them to think. But you know, that also isn't new. It happens in Euripides. You know, almost all of these techniques. It's just that in the period where postmodernism was the hot new thing, bringing them all together in one work was kind of refreshing. And I mean, I do think, at least for me in my middle grade work, I do try to deconstruct a lot of the tropes of children's fiction, because children are very savvy readers these days, and so are teens. You know, it is no longer the world where just taking fantasy slightly seriously will make you a legend. Like there's more going on there, and I think that you know, coming from the adult world, when I wrote Fairyland, I very much wanted to dive into all of that portal fantasy stuff and all of the things it had to say about women and all of the things it had to say about what an appropriate adulthood was and all of that. I wanted to like tear it up and tear it to pieces, which it Fairyland tries to do in a a very civilized, amusing sort of way. And the middle grade book that I'm working on now is a sort of the same thing with animal fiction, the talking animal Redwall kind of thing. So I think that when you come from the adult world, it's not only, you know, people are doing all this kind of experimentation. Laini Taylor is a great example of that, just within middle grade and YA anyway. But I think that we sort of come with stuff in our backpack and are like, well, what if I poke it with this? You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Would that make it jiggle? Would that make it scream? And it's fun to try and do that kind of stuff. It makes it more fun.
Yeah, and I often think about just in terms of you know, I really want to create a space for the reader while also adhering to what it is I need to do. And I don't think those things are in conflict. But in terms of that, I often think about whether I'm working on whether the novel I'm working on is a renovation or an innovation. So, for example, Dead Astronauts, my novel before this, was, as far as I was concerned, an innovation. So there was no expectation that I was going to be reworking things from the past. The whole idea was to try to do something that had not been done before. So that's a different set of expectations. For Lamb's Head, I feel like it is a renovation, that it's my addition to something that already exists and my take on it, and using again a fairly traditional setup to do the riffs that I wanted to do off of it. And so that's also why I don't think of it as postmodern, because I feel like the riffs I'm doing off of are often things that I discovered while researching the big book of classic fantasy, you know, from the 1800s all the way to World War II. So I feel like the book, the Lamb's Head book, owes a lot to that research and the stories. I mean, when you go to like Grimm's Fairy Tales and you go to Hans my Hedgehog, for example, which is one of my favorite stories, it is totally batshit. Like if you just write down bullet point by bullet point what happens in that story, it's much more hilarious than even the story is, but it also is completely off the charts, ridiculous, you know, and yet the internal logic of the story, the way it's presented, allows you to believe it and not be thrown out of the story, even though it's absolutely absurd. And so that's kind of what I was going for too, and why I had to, in the edits, recut Peculiar Peril, because I had sections like the bit with Vern and the burrower and this land bridge to England where it was too much in normal chapter size. So those chapters became smaller and cut up between others and things like that. So so those were the kinds of things I was thinking of, is this kind of revisionist kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think something people kind of have stopped mentioning is that the reason it's called postmodernism isn't anything to do with time. It's a reaction against modernism, which also isn't contemporary fiction. You know, modernism's been over for a long time, and so true postmodernism has to take into account modernism. And most of us aren't talking about modernism anymore. We're reacting against postmodernism. So it's a whole mess. But now that we've opened that box, I think that that one of the things you and I do very much have in common, and one of the reasons that we have crossed paths so many times, is that we both have this kind of mission statement of exploring the outer limits of commercial fiction and prose, and this kind of imagistic, dense writing. I know we're both fans of Clarice Lispector, this kind of immuund writing, which is what Helene Cixous called it, which is one of Derrida's students. So if we're going to get into postmodernism, I'm going there. I'm using the D. And so we're both huge fans of that kind of thing. And so I'm really interested to hear how you feel the arc of your career has been with that, with this kind of, I feel like as writers, we kind of go into that cosmic unknown of pure language, and then see how far back we can get and still sell a book. And I'm interested to talk about the arc of your career and where you see it going.
Yeah, no, it's been kind of fascinating. I mean, my career has been this kind of like slow progression, usually upward with some ticks downward, and then of course annihilation, in part of because of the movie, kind of like exploding things a bit. But in terms of the actual work, it's just been, I don't know. I think you've experienced this too, is that we've both managed to get things published that when you look back at it, you're kind of amazed, just in terms of, again, the commercial atmosphere of publishing, and that they've been received pretty well most of the time. I mean, even Dead Astronauts, which is probably the weirdest thing I've ever written in my entire life, I was amazed at the people who were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. I think that's really important when you're pushing the envelope like that. I think also the idea of genre labels can be really useful. Like the New Weird label was useful for a time because publishers thought that that label would sell books.
Yeah.
Turned out that they were wrong, but but it created a space.
A couple other names
right?
came out on top of that particular.
Barely by the skin of our teeth, except for Mieville. But
who came out of steampunk on top?
Well, that's the other thing, is I thought steampunk was
that
interesting
many.
because
Yeah.
steampunk's slightly reactionary in some ways, as we all know, but it also created the space, again, just like space opera does, weirdly sometimes, for some really weird, interesting in the poetic sense, plus also pushing the envelope in other ways stuff. So I go back and forth on the usefulness of labels sometimes, and try to avoid labels just because I keep doing different things, and also because of the steampunk stuff, which is because I did the Steampunk Bible for the longest time, even though I was still writing ambergris stuff, as I was the steampunk author, and then people would pick up something like Finch and it'd be like, there's no steampunk in this. Who is this jerk? But in terms of where it can create a space that's interesting and get you readers, right? And especially as I've dealt more with ecological and environmental concerns, it's like you have this potential trade-off. If you really want to explore it in the right way, sometimes you have to go off the charts experimental, but then you lose readers, right? And the whole point of supposedly writing about the environmental stuff is to convince people to some degree or somehow, but if you're talking to two people with it, then, so I think about that all the time. And I think of that constraint as a good thing, because I don't know how you think about it, but I think constraint breeds interesting solutions, no matter what it is. So whenever I find there's a constraint or of any kind, whether it's with regard to career or genre or the prose itself, I begin to wonder, what is the workaround that's actually better than the thing I was thinking of? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Like, you know, art thrives on restriction, and I absolutely believe that. And I know about myself that I can get very sidetracked into, you know, language and image and lose the plot, so to speak. And I did these two media tie-in novels. I did a Mass Effect novel and a Minecraft novel. And part of the reason I did those was to, you know, tell people that I can, but also I was really interested to see if I could write a book where no one cared how nice I could make a sentence at all. Not the editors, not the readers. That was never going to be what it was about. It was characters and plot, and nothing else would matter. And could I write a book that anyone would like if you took away one of my superpowers? And so I feel like I learned a lot from writing those books because I wasn't allowed to do the thing that sort of defines me. And I'm always looking for that. And I'm sure that you are too, always looking for the thing that challenges you and that you haven't done before, and that is going to make you feel confronting.
It's hard for me to repeat myself. I have to, I don't know about you, but I have to often, I mean, even like in a series, like there's certain things that are going to repeat, but there's certain things that aren't. But if I don't feel like I'm sitting down to write a novel, like for the first time, like there's a certain amount of uncertainty, like, have I actually really done this before? Because it's different enough that I don't really know exactly right away how I'm going to do it, that I'm not really as interested in doing it.
Yeah.
So there's that sense of discovery that needs to be there, even though it can be harrowing first, but it gets easier because, as you know, once you've finished a few of these, you realize no matter what you're feeling at the beginning, probably you're going to finish it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
I had this conversation with my husband a couple of months ago when I was working on the middle grade book. And I had said to him, like, you know, I'm making this hard for myself. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. It is what it is. I can, you know, experiment with other things, but I don't have to break new ground or reinvent the wheel. And then a couple of days later, he was like, why are you sad? Is it because there was a wheel on the ground and everyone's touched it and you're not actually happy with it unless it's your own wheel that you invented yourself? And I'm like, yes, this is a stupid wheel. I hate that wheel. And I mean, he's right. Like, unless at least I feel like I am, I might not be, but unless I feel like I'm hewing a new wheel out of new materials, it's not fun for me.
Yeah.
It nearly killed me to write a 5-book series. Honestly.
Yeah.
I like to start something completely wildly different.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with Peculiar Peril. It's actually 4 novels in 2 volumes.
Yeah. I mean,
because once I finished the first one, I realized, well, this is a cliffhanger. Yeah, but unless you release both books in the same year, it's not necessarily satisfying for the reader where that cliffhanger is. Like, I didn't realize that the more or less the full story arc of the first 2 novels was a full, you know, like I thought that I was writing a novel that had a full story arc and then another, but it turned out that it was 2 books. So so that's why it's so long, because it's actually 2 novels, and that's why the questions are in there and the break, so the reader has a chance to kind of catch their breath. But
yeah. Somebody asked who the author I mentioned in connection with Derrida is, and it's Helene Cixous. That is, if I can remember, it's Cixious. And she writes absolutely beautiful, or wrote, I think she's passed on now, absolutely beautiful critical work. So highly recommended. And she talks about immuned writing. That's her word for the kind of thing that Jeff and I are talking about, the kind of thing that Dead Astronauts is, the kind of thing that parts of all of Jeff's books are, where it sort of feels like you're tapping directly into the mythic kind of consciousness. And the writers that she talks about, I don't remember one of them because I'd never heard of him, and then when I read him, I didn't care. But I do remember that it was Kafka and Clarice Lispector, and I've become a huge fan of Clarice Lispector, who is just an incredible genius that no one's ever heard of. And well, Kafka's in a peculiar peril.
as an amphibian. But yeah, Lispector is, I just, when I read her collected stories, and I love the fact, of course, that they were set out chronologically. I love being able to study that. And then also the fact that unfortunately it's so rare, especially for that time period, to have a collected stories by a woman that spans decades, right?
Yeah.
It's like her whole life, you know.
And
So
I mean,
that
to me,
also,
she's up there with Borges. Like she's just
yeah,
an amazing
absolutely.
amazing author on every level, and it just not even discussed for the most part
Yeah.
these days. So everybody should go read Clarice. So there's a question here that's for me technically, but I think that it's a great question to, I'll answer it, but you can talk about how you'll feel about it in the future.
Okay.
So it says, Catherynne, how does it feel to know that some of my readers have grown up with my writing as I did with classic children's literature, i.e. reading children's stories as a kid and reading newer novels as adults, and how that also charted my life growing up, since my first book came out when I was very young. So you're going to have that experience with people reading this when they're younger,
Right.
and then moving on to your other books. I mean, look, I'm still at the point where if someone says, "Oh, I loved your book when I was a kid," I'd say, "Oh, gross," because like, it's still weird to me. It's so I don't feel old, so it feels bizarre to me that like an entire grown finished human can say, "I loved your book when I was a kid," but I have had to accept that not only are there a lot of people out there who have grown up with Fairyland and it has been incredibly meaningful to them and formative for them, but that because of some of the techniques I use, because of that fourth wall breaking, because of the narrator and what that book has to say, they have in a very real sense grown up with me, and with my voice as one that was an important part of the people around them. And it is humbling for sure, and a very strange thing to think about, having had such an effect on a still growing brain, which is a very different thing than when you write for adults and they, are 40 and they come up to you and they don't know how to express excitement anymore because life has been so terrible for so long, and they love your books, but it's not the same as when a 13-year-old kid loves your book. They don't have any filter for love, as we learn to get when we're older. So how do you think you will feel if in 15 years someone comes up and is like, "I grew up with Peculiar Apparel, I read it a million times, I loved it"?
Well, I mean, I've had kind of a preview of that from helping run Shared Worlds, this teen writing workshop that you were a
Mhm.
guest at Wofford College.
Can you tell
Just
everyone exactly what that is? Because I think it's just one of the most amazing things ever, and I don't think that everyone watching will know.
well, it's called Shared Worlds, and every year, not this year, obviously, for safety reasons, 60 students, sometimes from all over the world. Before Trump, it was definitely all over the world, which is a little sad. Would get together, would apply, get together, and on the Wofford campus for Shared World, which is 2 weeks. And the first week, they get in groups of 10 and they create their own world, and then they write a story in the second week set in their world, and they have to also present their worlds. And what we found, that's the unique element, I suppose, is that by being invested in creating a world, they have a personal stake, but not so personal as with their own writing, that that even the shyest can't feel like they can write a story in the second week. And I think that's really important, to give them that space where they can engage their imaginations, but they don't feel like they're going to be revealing something so much that if there's, that they have to worry about feedback on it or anything like that, even though our critiques, of course, are not the same as you would give to an adult. So that works really well, and it also engages their brains in different ways. At that age, they don't necessarily know, even though they came there for the writing, whether they want to be a writer by the time they leave. But because of the skills they get from the world building and everything else, maybe there's some other aspect of creativity that they latch onto. So that's what that is. But anyway, so they've read my work, and Annihilation, I think, was the one that a lot of them glommed onto. It doesn't have like anything explicit in it. It's just strange, and so a lot of them would read that, as if they were curious about my work at the camp. The other thing is that because of the ecological element becoming more and more explicit, what you were talking about with regard to them feeling like they grew up with you is something that's beginning to happen, because there's really, thankfully, there never really was, but in terms of it just being most of my personal life is now around the yard and around pushing for environmental issues. So there's no separation between the work and myself. So it's kind of intensified because they'll see me on Twitter and it's the same person in a way as in the novels, if they think of the writer as being in the novels. And then the other thing that I thought was really, I never expected, is that on the Dead Astronauts tour, which was this whirlwind in December before everything went to hell this year, it was 90% young people.
Hmm.
And I was used to the audiences where I knew a lot of the people and I had seen them for years. And it was great to have that connection, but it just was, and I still don't know if it was because of the Annihilation movie and their entry point, or their entry point to my Twitter and the fact that I talked to a rabbit, I don't know. But there was suddenly a totally different audience for Dead Astronauts, where there had been growing something that I didn't know about. And so there's been all these kinds of interesting aspects about audience and whatnot. And we're friends with readers from like Venice Underground, who are now all grown up, and because that was kind of a goth book, so there were actually a lot of teens who read it, even though it's incredibly bloody. And so I've had a little bit of a taste of that, but I'll be curious to know what happens with Peril. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that experience too. Like the two times my audience who I saw coming to readings really changed was after Fairyland, and then all of a sudden, I mean, I've always had young people. Like my books tend to really appeal to sort of women between the ages of 16 and 60. So I've always had young people in my audience, but now children were coming. So like if I was there for a book that wasn't Fairyland, I had to decide based on the aggregate ages if I would read the swear part or not.
Right.
And then it was with space opera, there was the other one that it was a completely different demographic of people who wanted to come and listen to a book about Eurovision and politics and comedy, rather than fairy tales or deco punk science fiction. And now it really, I assume this will be for the foreseeable future. Now any given audience I have has Fairyland and space opera people in it. Like they may not even entirely be that interested in the new book. They're there because of Fairyland and space opera and the Minecraft kids now. But like it's you can see these changes as you kind of, because not everybody does jump between styles and subgenres and everything the way we do. Some people like have their thing and they stick to it and they sort of see that audience grow, but we really see it shift.
Yeah, and it's a blessing, because it's like when you see that, you realize I've actually been in the game for a while, and I'm still in the game, so
yeah
not
absolutely.
to be taken for granted. Yeah.
Well, I think we're almost out of time, but I think we can probably do one more question. Let's choose. Giovanna says, do we think the pandemic will produce more stories about diseases in the future? Is there something critical in your lives that have happened, other than inspiration from other writers, that pushed to write any specific stories?
It's tough for me because it takes me a long time to process current events and have them come out in the fiction usually. So I don't know. I mean, Finch was really about our involvement in Iraq. And the only reason I could write it that quickly is because after those events is because it wasn't set in the real world, which would be, I think it would have been absolutely horrifying if I tried to do a real world version of that. But it's true, you can channel the emotion. So I just finished this eco thriller, Hummingbird Salamander, where the main character, this woman, is increasingly isolated and in kind of desperate circumstances. And so I believe a lot in method acting and channeling emotion and kind of becoming the character to some degree in terms of how you react to the world at a particular time. And in this case, because I was becoming isolated, even though it wasn't her exact situation, channeling that emotion into those scenes is what carried me through. So it's like the pandemic is in the book, even though that's not the subject. It's kind of in the background. but sometimes I think this is the emotional resonance that you're able to channel right away, the thing that you're feeling, that you're kind of like a conduit for, more than anything specific about, for example, disease. I don't know, for me at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does take time. I think, I mean, I don't know how November is going to go, but let's assume for a minute that it
I may
goes.
just have to get so drunk on election night, or someone's just have to hit me with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
I don't wake up the day after. I don't know, but yeah.
Let's assume for a second that it goes well.
Yeah.
I think it'll take some time before people can really write about the last 4 years and this year specifically. It takes time to process trauma, and we've all gone through this collective trauma. I was asked to write a short story about the pandemic almost as soon as it started for a benefit anthology, and that's easily the fastest I've ever turned trauma into art. And I could do it for one short story, but there's no way I could have written a novel about the pandemic during the pandemic. It's just too much. Like the process of art is a process, and that's too quick. But I do notice that the things that I'm writing, it leaks in. It's contamination, you know. It gets in there one way or another. I didn't even really notice that I had written this social distancing pangolin in the book that I'm working on now, because pangolins are incredibly solitary creatures. They don't even have a collective noun.
Wonderful.
But you know, so it's a person for whom loneliness is the highest goal in life, and just trying to keep everyone away from them. And I had not even noticed until I'd written 100 pages with this character that I had created something that reflected what I was going through and how separate everybody was, separate but together. So I do think it gets in there, but you know, really facing it head on is going to take time. You know, people were talking when Trump was elected about, oh, we'll get great music and stuff, because they were very tone deaf. But we won't get great music. We'll get great music in 5 years when everybody can process this and understand what it means for them and isn't afraid of what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, like the hierarchy of needs requires physical safety before creativity, and that's where a lot of people have kind of gotten stuck in these last few years.
I don't know about you, but I get frozen. I have to be patient because I realize it comes and goes in waves, that I'm going to write again, but this day is not going to be the day I'm going to write. And if I'm patient with myself, then I just like that's the rhythm that's different, such a different rhythm now. It's like frozen, right, frozen, right. You know,
Absolutely.
just eke it out, but take care of yourself first and everything. So
yeah. Well, I think that we can sort of ease our way out, but it was awesome to talk to you, Jeff.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. I mean, I honestly, some of these events like this one are just like an excuse to talk to people that I really like, you know. So because I'm only talking to Anne and the rabbit right now. So
I mean, my toddler is not that great when it comes to postmodernism. Like, tries, but
hard to believe.
he's not a fan of Derrida.
Not yet. I have to say that I liked how you ended there, because I was thinking that this conversation is one of those things that gives a modicum of hope, right? You know, as you said, you get frozen, you get paralyzed, but then there are reminders that life will hopefully go on. I really loved and really appreciate having you both here. Kat, I know you have a lot to do otherwise, but if you're interested in hosting the remaining author appearance series, we'll talk after.
Doing this, like Jeff said, it's a chance to like actually have something approximating social interaction with people that I like, who are not, you know, either sublinguistic or an animal.
Oh, that's great. Well, reminder to everyone, it's not too late. It's never too late to go to any of the participating bookstores and buy these books. I mean, even if you don't want to buy them from my bookstore, buy them from somebody's bookstore, because these are great books. Anyway, enjoy
find
this
us
next
on Twitter, both of us.
Yes, both great Twitter follows. Thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time we do this.
Bye. Thanks,
Take
guys.
care. Bye.
Great
Bye.
question.